Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello, everybody. Welcome to one more week of the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. And this week, joining us from the beautiful city of Barcelona is Omar Perez. Hey, Omar. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Vasco. So happy to be here.
Omar is an Agile Coach from Barcelona who currently supports distributed teams that build data products to enable their company to be genuinely data-driven. He has had many previous lives as a design thinker, market analyst, communication consultant, project manager, and startup founder. He aspires to become a Peopleware expert. Omar, that was a short intro. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and how did you end up becoming a Scrum Master?
See, there's this quote attributed to John Lennon that says, "Life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans." Well, that was the case for me. I met this friend who happened to be a CTO, and haven't seen each other for a while. And he asked me, "So what are you doing now?" Because he knew I had different lives before, like professional lives. I said, "Well, I'm actually a project manager." So he asked me a few more questions. We get into a conversation, and suddenly he exclaimed, "You'll make a great Scrum Master." Well, I asked him, "What's that?" Sorry, I just didn't know. And he went on, he gave me a lowdown of what it meant, and he gave me a few tips on how to get there. Well, many years later on, I'm doing the same thing. I'm kind of, they call it paid forward? No, where basically whenever I meet someone that I think has the potential to become a great Scrum Master, I kind of mentor that person, to take the right steps for the career change. So, yeah.
And what was that first project like? Because you were a project manager, so did you slowly start moving towards the Scrum Master role, or was it like one job and boom, you're a Scrum Master? How was it?
Well, he gave me a few tips. One of them, as you probably heard before, was going through the certification industry. I got my all those trainings. Then, of course, I attended all those meetups on all ways of meeting, with Scrum Masters. And then, I made connections. So I started volunteering, in startups, and they didn't have the resources to pay for me. So I started getting some experience. And then finally, I got my job. It was at a consulting firm. And that was like a great boot camp because I was supposed to support a new team almost every month. Projects were changing. So it was like a field doctor, where I couldn't see the, results midterm.
The long term. Yeah. Absolutely. On the other hand, that can be quite an amazing learning experience to get exposed to many different realities. And maybe that's one of those that you're going to share with us next. So, Omar, next, we want you to tell us a story of one of those tough moments we all go through. So walk us through that story, like all of the details, how it felt at that time. We'll dive into the details and conclusions later, but walk us through that story.
Let me be clear. I believe that I almost fail pretty much every day in the sense that I have things in my mind of how I would like things to be with my team, with my organization. And I think I make a lot of effort, put a lot of energy into the system for those things to work. But as you probably know, change is difficult. I aspire to be an expert on Peopleware, but that's complicated. So I've learned over the years, I've learned to coexist with all these micro failures, if you want, But
I like the word, by the way, micro failures.
Micro failures, you live with it because at the end of the day, it's so hard to change people and organizations and systems, but you learn a lot. No, you fail until you don't. So, but this one, it's probably, I think I love retrospectives and I'm pretty good at those, but I would call this story the fail retrospective. I said, whoa. Why is that important? Well, let me give you the story. It was this Spanish team, right? And who was, I would say, forcefully cooperating with another team from the other side of the Atlantic, same company, but they just, different branches. And it was a very difficult coexistence. We were a Scrum team and we were doing Scrum, I would say, in a very decent way. I don't know what framework they were following. I wouldn't qualify that as waterfall. It was like chaos. And so that created a lot of burnout, a lot of overtime on our side, poor communication, all those frictions that one can imagine. So there was a point where my team urged me to elevate this, to escalate this to management and maybe, but I insisted that that was probably not the best way, because change imposed is change opposed. So I suggested to the team to conduct a retrospective. Of course, they didn't know what it was, so I kind of explained, and they seemed to buy into it. Great. So we send the invites, and everyone accepts them. All the Spanish team shows up the day and the time, and 10 minutes, no one's there from the other side. 15 minutes, no one's there from the other side. So I suggest maybe we should call one of them. So we call them, and then we hear this background noise, kids playing, like so busy. So like, well, are you working? I said, no, I'm not. So where are you? So like, I'm picnicking in a park. I said, I mean, are you supposed to be working? I said, no, it's a public holiday over here. So why in the world did you all accept that invite? They didn't get a clear answer. So you can imagine the frustration of the team.
Wow. Frustration would be a small price for that event.
I said, well, cultural gaps. I don't know. I tried to minimize, the pain in the team. So we went for a second round. We made sure that it was a working day in that country. We sent the invitation and they accepted. Great. We show up there. And then in order to optimize our discussion time, which I think is very important, I suggested that we did some async work, which was basically filling up a Miro board with a few insights or perceptions about how, the project we worked in had been. Well, the Miro board was full of insights in our side. It was blank on their side. Said, well, that's not a good start, but that's okay. We can live with it. We can make up with it, for the first minutes. So we go in, log into the meeting, and then suddenly we start seeing all these names and faces we've never seen or heard of before. And then we start. So maybe there was only one person or two people we knew. So we ask, who are they? And basically, it was people who just joined the company or who just joined the project. So I was like, okay, but...
And you didn't know about that, right? So these were all new people for the whole team.
Yeah, so I said, okay, this is a retrospective. I thought I had explained what a retrospective means. Retrospective, you look back, so it has to be people who've been involved in that project, in that cooperation, process. And only one or two people did. Said, okay, it's okay. Let's act. Since we're here, let's them act as observers, and then the two people who actually were there may contribute or represent their team. So next phase is like, okay, there's this Miro board. We share again the link. Could you please fill out some insights, some perceptions? There were a few questions that we asked, right, about the perceptions on how the project went. It took 45 minutes for them to log in.
45 minutes to log into oh my God.
Such a standard application. I don't know. They were having technical problems, but it's hard to do help desk, if you don't see where...
I have heard a story like that before. Like that, I believe it was here on the podcast even. Anyway, I was talking to another Scrum Master who was sharing a similar experience. Like even the basic logistics didn't work. Didn't answer emails, didn't know how to log in, like what you just shared. And I'm thinking are we even in the same universe? Are we playing the same game here? And I don't know how that retrospective happened. That's the next question, of course. But what might drive a team to, at least in theory, be working together with another team, but in practice to be so apart, so unrelated, so disconnected? What was driving that disconnection, Omar?
Well, silos, management, agendas, different pressures, all these systemic, problems. That's why when I think about failure, going back to my initial comment, I identify the root cause of many of my team's failures as systemic problems, over which, unfortunately, we have no control. So yeah, in this case, it was all these political things that we later discovered. So it was a failed retrospective. We could only retrospect for 5 minutes, and of course, all of them had to jump to the next meeting.
Because they had said yes to many other meetings, of course.
Yeah.
And one of the things that this reminds me is that as Scrum Masters, there's a bunch of things that we should have in our checklist of not to do, right? Like stuff to say, hey, we're not working this way, period. If you want to work this way, you hire somebody else. We are not working this way. And one of those is this working with a team that is not speaking the same language when it comes to work. And I don't mean, French and Spanish. I mean somebody who's working with Agile and Scrum and delivering every 2 weeks and requiring and needing constant feedback, and somebody else who's in a 6-month project that, spends the first 2 months writing requirements, and then later on, maybe there's some testing, maybe in the last 2 weeks of the project, which eventually end up being, 6 months late out of a 6-month project. So, and it sounds to me that one of the failures that we have as Scrum Masters is not being assertive in identifying those characteristics that allow us and the teams we work with to be successful, right? So the takeaway that I take from this story is, all right, if I find myself in that situation again, I will create that list and I will go to the manager and say, hey, here's the minimum the team needs to be successful. And as you can see, most of these are not met. So we can't work this way. Now we need to look at it as a company problem, not a team problem anymore. It's not what the team is doing, it's what the company is doing. But that's my takeaway. How about you, Omar? What is the takeaway you want our listeners to take from this story?
Well, first thing, the first one would be that it's always good to have an Agile champion. I won't say a Scrum Master, Agile Coach on the other side, when you work with. But there was none over there. So that's why I suggested to management, why don't you hire an Agile Coach or Scrum Master, whatever, to support those teams over the other side of the Atlantic. That didn't happen. So because of, budget, all that stuff. So I suggested the second thing, it's now that we can work like remotely, even if there are time differences, why don't we mix teams? Instead of having our team in Spain and then the other team on the other side of the Atlantic, why don't we have like 3 people from their team and 3 people from our team, and we create a really distributed team? So, when you start in a new team, you kind of, when you go to Rome, you do as Romans do, that goes the saying. So a little bit, even if those people were contaminated by their ways of doing over there, once they start working and they are in a minority or an equal, they may learn how we work here, kind of copy and follow it's easier for them to adopt that if they're shielded by their peers who all think more or less the same. So that's why I suggested to mix the teams. But then political things, came and, headcounts and control and all that stuff. So it didn't happen.
Yeah, and this is why it's so important to have it clear for ourselves what is the minimum we need to do to accept a job, right? It reminds me of the Mission Impossible. Your mission, Jim, should you accept it? And we should really ask ourselves, do I accept this mission? Because, of course, if we accept it, we have to live with it, right? And it's not necessarily easy. I mean, we are being paid. We are employees in some cases. And, of course, consultants, externals in other cases. But we do need to have it clear for ourselves. What are the things I'm willing to accept? And what are the things I'm not willing to accept? Mm-hmm. It was a great story. Thank you for sharing that, Omar.
My pleasure. But by the way, it's the only failed retrospective that I love retrospectives.
Monday is about what we learn from our obstacles and our failures. But tomorrow is Team Tuesday here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. We explore teams and their journeys, the habits they develop that threaten their performance, how each of our guests help their teams evolve, and the one key lesson they learned from that experience. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.